A few days ago, I decided to watch a 2025 live-action remake of Snow White, a film based on the 1937 animated classic by Walt Disney, itself inspired by a German fairy tale. The original tells the story of a young woman who, from the very first scenes, signs about longing for true love. A prince. When he appears, she initially rejects him and retreats, but the story unfolds as one of patience, effort, and resilience. So despite being centered on a female protagonist, the film speaks about a universal value and story about men and women, perseverance, sacrifice, and even hope. Snow White works, suffers, adapts. The dwarves, symbolic perhaps to the imperfect masculinity, also work and grow, and then being replaced by the image of this perfect man that waited and looked for the sleeping princess. It doesn't matter how much he had to wait. Then they kiss. Perhaps as an awakening of sexuality, as it is a fairy tale and you shouldn't be so explicit. But anyway, and then they live, and we watch the movie again. And again, and again. After all, this is what happens in real life. The happy ending is repeating this dynamic throughout life, perhaps. It is a story about dreams that require time. Not ironically, it is also why the story has endured as well. It is remembered not only as one of Disney's best animations, but one of the best movies ever made. It is absolute cinema. But then there's 2025 remake that shifts that structure completely. So instead of a young woman who desires love and grows through hardship, we're given a protagonist who claims she needs no man, faces no real internal struggle, and reinterprets the original message as outdated. And the 1937 version, Snow White cleans the dwarf's house as a form of reciprocity. In the remake, she commands them to clean it themselves, while they also had to work. And meanwhile, the lead actress publicly criticized the original film, calling the prince a stalker and dismissing the story's traditional romantic arc. And at the time, the backlash was immediate, and the film was labeled as one of the worst movies ever made, even before releases. But now, for me, I quite enjoyed it. Though I also quite enjoyed Dragon Ball Evolution, which is considered one of the worst movies ever made. And Batman vs Superman as well. I love the movie, man. Judge me. So when I'm saying that Snow White isn't all that bad, well, you can imagine for yourself how much worse the movie actually is. But the stronger criticisms of the film center less on cinematic quality, although there are some, and more on the tone, the message it tried to convey. The perception that the remake attempted to dismantle the symbolic structure of the original rather than to just reinterpret it. And what happens when you try to deconstruct something that has endured for ages? Well, you get something so forgotten that even the actors aren't even seen or in anything relevant since then. And this cultural shift, of course, does not exist in isolation. It reflects the broader ideological movement of our current times, particularly later waves of feminism, for example. First wave feminism focused on legal rights, voting, work, civic participation. The movement corresponded with measurable social development, but second and third wave theorists, influenced by thinkers such as Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, Michel Foucault, and later Judith Butler, reframed identity itself as socially constructed. The argument evolved from equality under law to skepticism toward biological differences, and eventually toward the idea that sex distinctions themselves are largely constructed, socially constructed. Yet, empirical research complicates that narrative because cross-cultural studies show that in more egalitarian societies, psychological differences between men and women often widen rather than shrink, a phenomenon sometimes called the gender equality paradox. In Scandinavian countries, if you know Jordan Peterson, you already know this. But for example, women score higher in agreeableness and gravitate toward care professions, while men men disproportionately enter STEM fields. Wage gaps correlate strongly with these occupational choices, not simply discrimination. So data also shows that men dominate both extremes of economic distribution because they are both among the wealthiest and also among the homeless and incarcerated as well that have zero income salaries. And marriage patterns reflect this more clearly. Divorce rates in many Western countries are initiated by women roughly 70% of the time. And social network effects suggest divorce can be statistically contagious. None of this negates abusive cares or the need for legal exit options. It does suggest that cultural messaging influences personal directions. When narratives repeatedly frame independence as liberation for a man and dependence as weakness, relational structures shift accordingly as well. And as I will talk in a later video about this, there are several correlations that liberalism and leftist politics, and women specifically, is related to being less happy than those that hold conservative opinions. So in a sense, it is really ironic how this movement that was called to make women better and empowered can actually be making women worse. And not only women, society in general. The question is not whether traditions are flawless, they are not. But traditions that endure for millennia likely encoded adaptive functions in itself. They are useful, even if we don't know that. And destroying their wholesale because they conflict with modern sensibilities risks losing stabilizing structures without understanding why they existed in first place. Nietzsche, for example, argued that what is fundamentally hostile to life does not survive long. Civilizations evolve by refining inherited systems, not by erasing them entirely. Existence may precede essence, as Sartre proposed, but existence cannot be constructed by denying reality. Biological differences between men and women persist across cultures. Societies that recognize both equality under law and differences in nature tend to function more coherently than those that attempt to erase one side of the question. First wave feminism expanded rights and opportunity, net positive correlated with development. But later ideological extensions that deny difference or frame one sex as inherently oppressive risk creating division rather than balance. And all of this is replicated by our culture, even by our movies. The deeper issue that these movies, Snow White, raised is not about a princess or a prince. It is whether about progress means refinement of the past or rejection of it entirely. And if the movie was so bad that, well, we don't even talk about it anymore unless it is to say how bad it is, you have to ask yourself, are those messages really doing great for women, for men, for society? Well, I think the answer is apparently no. But tell me what you think about it in the comments. If you're looking for a psychological session regarding any of those topics here about how the social pressures affect your life or even the world around you, you can book a session with me by clicking in the link in the description. I'm a clinical psychologist in Brazil. I will gladly attend you. And my name is Julius Caesar, and I'll see you in the next time. Bye-bye.